Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we're going to be taking a look at Wargame terrain. But before we start, be sure to like, comment and subscribe so you don't miss an update. Over the past few years, I haven't even considered building any scenery for my collection of models. It's a long and arduous process and it has varying results, some of which are great and some which are simply awful waste of time and space. Let's have a wander back in time to when I first started collecting miniatures and what I did for terrain back then. The first piece of terrain I got was a battle mat, which came in the Battle Masters box set. It was a large vinyl mat with some hexagons on it as movement spaces. The box also came complete with a plastic 5-part tower, which was a handy place to situate a cannon if you're on the side of good. Of course, I always go back to Battle Masters in these videos as it was my starting point in collecting. Moving on from Battle Masters, we have Hero Quest and Advanced Hero Quest. Of course, these came with a whole dungeon's worth of fun stuff such as weapon racks, thrones, treasure chests and again a tiled surface to play on in the form of cardboards. All well and good if you want to play in a dungeon with imaginary walls, I guess. I remember Dark World had a large plastic temple with hinged doors, which was pretty cool, and it quickly became a staple of my larger scale battles. I don't remember ever even painting it. It was a grey plastic that looked sort of like stone anyway, and the doors were brown plastic too, so I used it as was. After these rather lazy efforts on my part, I entered the inevitable polystyrene phase that everyone goes through eventually. Look at the fun stuff you can make out of those polystyrene packing materials you get surrounding TVs, washing machines and fridges. All ripe for the picking. Now I have to admit my polystyrene phase lasted for a good few years. I ended up building 2 huge table-sized battlefields, both mounted on hardboard for that extra rigidity. Of course they were incredibly heavy and unwieldy and limited me to fighting either in a labyrinth-like structure made from the base and top piece of our washing machine packaging and a massive foot-thick undulating frozen tundra made from offcuts of lots of different pieces, covered in my newfangled favourite material, Modrock. Modrock, great material for small pieces, terrible material for large scale pieces that need to be moved after every battle. The problem? Weight. This stuff was cloth gauze covered in a layer of plaster, which when mixed with water would make a solid and very durable covering for otherwise quite fragile polystyrene. I busily made a large battlefield on a piece of hardboard which came off of one of our old doors, so you can imagine the size of this thing. I have to admit though, it was a pretty sweet piece of terrain. It had a plastic bridge from some random game which covered a deep ravine about a foot deep, and it had a big plastic skull from somewhere or other as well. So I had a few pieces of enormous terrain and was starting to get bored of fighting over the same area of the universe both in Warhammer and 40k. To that end I figured I could mix it up and make some scattered terrain. My idea was to build a trench system for 40k. I had found some old sandbags kicking around in a box of soldiers and repurposed them with some lollipop sticks and again some more Modrock. These came out pretty good. I painted them up in no time flat and I had the trench system to play with. By this time Gorkamorka had arrived and by Gork there was some great terrain in there. Grey plastic bulkheads with interlocking card pieces. You could build vertically by stacking the bulkheads, or if you're feeling orky enough just throw the pieces on top of one another and see what you came up with. This was a revelation. I soon bought several more box sets to really up the ante. I ended up with a 3-layered orc fort complete with ladders and some kind of vehicle port. I saw a few people using Pringles cans as towers, so I did that too. The possibilities were endless. After my orc collecting days had died down, I took a break from building terrain and just concentrated on building and painting models instead. As I moved on to work and life started ticking along, I ended up falling out of contact with most of the people I used to game with, and my gaming days steadily came to an end. Without a game to play, what's the point of having a load of scenery kicking around taking up space after all? Until a few days ago I couldn't tell you, I always fancied doing some rather fancy photo shoots with my models. However, not having the physical space to set it up, a 1-year-old little boy rampaging around the house, and no real inspiration to build it, led me to simply not bother. Certainly in the time I haven't been making any scenery. I have amassed an enormous painted army, so there is that. However, the other day I saw a fab picture of a Chaos Army complete with a Castle Greyskull in the background, and just had to get building and converting some stuff from my own photo shoot. So here is what I came up with so far. A mutated tower sculpted over the top of a car coolant pump. I'm considering turning this into a possessed windmill, so stay tuned for that. I rang my parents in dire need of my brother's Castle Greyskull to tinker with. Not only that, but I went and brought the Fab Wizard's Tower from Games Workshop, which is, to be fair, really quite nice, and being quite tall will make a great piece for in the far background, as it can loom large over things in the foreground. So yeah, I've actually thought about this a bit. Finally, I bought myself a couple of pieces from the local aquarium. A small castle with tower, which will make a great standalone piece, and a rocky outcrop in the shape of a pile of skulls. As you can see, I have already started modifying the skull outcrop by filling it with modelling clay and sculpting the inside. I plan on coating it with a durable dark grey primer and then adding some washes to give it some depth, and then dry brushing it with a natural grey colour. Once that's all dry, I think some light effects in the eye sockets will give it a good atmospheric look. It'll be perfect standing next to the Wizard's Tower, as there are some skulls sculpted into the base of that too. When I get a hold of Castle Greyskull, I will assess how best to sculpt and paint over it. At the moment, I'm considering mounting it on an MDF base and then sculpting around the base of the thing and building it up into a couple of interlocking castles, using the two halves as the starting point. That way I can use them from multiple angles. Well, let's see what I come up with, no promises here. So, what did you think of my trot through my experiences of Wargame terrain, and where I will be going with this mini project over the coming months? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and thanks very much for watching. Peace.